Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why we attach certain ideas to specific groups of people even when it seems totally random? This new study dives deep into the hidden connections that shape our stereotypes. What if I told you that stereotypes aren't just about judging people based on traits like smart or kind? What if they're built on a whole secret network of everyday objects and concepts that we link to different social groups? Imagine this: we often think of women as being associated with things like wine and harps, while men might be linked to beer and drums. These aren't just random pairings. Researchers are showing that these cross-domain connections, like linking social groups to objects or concepts completely unrelated to a simple trait, actually form a hidden architecture of how stereotypes are built. And the super cool part is, by messing with these connections, we can actually change how people feel about social groups. So when we talk about stereotypes, we usually think of direct associations, like we might say Asians are analytical or men are decisive. But these researchers from Princeton and the universities of Wisconsin and Chicago weren't satisfied with just that. They realized people link groups to way more than just traits. Think about it. If you ask someone if women were a beverage, what would it be? They might say wine. If you ask about men, maybe beer or whiskey. Women link to cats or harps, men to lions or drums, wealthy people to champagne and Porsches, working class to beer and pickup trucks. These links stretch across all sorts of everyday things and activities. The big question is, what comes first? Do we decide the group is caring and then find objects like flowers to match? Or is it more like a web where these object associations build the stereotype? The researchers here argue it is more like the latter. These cross-domain links and objects are the foundation, the very beams holding up the stereotype. They call this the hidden architecture of stereotype, and their goal is to bring it into view. So how do we even study this hidden architecture? These scientists came up with a clever way to map it out. They asked a bunch of people, over 600 in this first part, to answer questions like, if a rich person were a color, what would it be? Or if a young person were a beverage, what would it be? They asked these questions about 100 different social groups across 8 different categories like animals, sports, vehicles, and yes, beverages and colors too. Think of it like building a massive map showing how different social groups connect to all sorts of everyday things. What they built was a huge network. Each point in the network is either a social group like woman or upper class, or a non-social object like milkshake or polo. Lines connect them, showing how often people link that group to that object. And get this, after filtering out super rare answers, they ended up with over 6,000 connections between 100 social groups and 821 different everyday concepts. That is a lot of hidden associations. They then looked at how consistent these associations were. For example, while many people might link upper class individuals to wine and champagne, some might link them to tea. They found that these associations weren't just random noise. Even less common links carried meaningful information. And here is where it gets really interesting. They wanted to see if these linked objects actually reflected the stereotypes we hold about the groups. So they used a super advanced AI called the large language model to rate all these objects for warmth, how friendly or trustworthy they seem, and competence, how capable or intelligent they seem. They found that objects linked to a social group generally had similar warmth and competence ratings to that group. For example, objects linked to nurses tended to be rated as warm, just like nurses are often stereotyped. Objects linked to CEOs tended to be rated as competent, mirroring the competence stereotype for that role. This means that the warmth and competence we associate with groups aren't just stuck to the group itself. They spread out and color the everyday objects we link to them. It is like the group stereotype is hidden within the network of associated objects. This is the core of their hidden architecture idea. But okay, knowing this is cool, can we actually change stereotypes by playing with these connections? The researchers decided to test this. They designed an experiment where people had to justify these. If X were a Y, it would be Y statements. For example, if a woman were a musical instrument, it would be a harp. They set up 3 groups of participants. One group, the stereotype control, got mostly typical stereotype, consistent associations. Another, the random control, got random objects linked to the group, but the most important group was the network intervention. These participants were given associations drawn from the network of a different group that was known to be high on warmth or competence. For instance, to make women seem stronger, they linked them to objects typically associated with athletes, like cheetahs or drums. To make a group perceived as low warmth seem warmer, they linked them to nurse-associated items. The key was that they never explicitly told participants to think about traits. Instead, participants had to explain why the strange association made sense. By doing this, the researchers hoped to see if guiding people to reason through these links would change their underlying, often unconscious evaluations of the target group. And guess what? It worked. The network intervention group, the one that reasoned about counter-stereotypical links, showed a clear shift. Participants were more likely to use positive evaluative traits like strong or caring to describe the target groups compared to the control groups. For example, when women were linked to athlete concepts, people wrote justifications describing them as sleek and powerful. When Muslims were linked to nurse concepts, justifications talked about them being supportive and caring. This wasn't just about exposure to new objects. The random control group, which also got new objects, but not strategically chosen ones, didn't show the same level of positive change. This suggests that the type of object and the meaning it carries is crucial. They also found something really interesting about how people reasoned. People who made what they call analogical connections, finding deeper structural similarities between the group and the object, were more likely to show a shift in their judgments. For instance, saying champagne represents prestige. Similar to how communal honor is valued in Pacific cultures is analogical reasoning. This kind of deeper thinking was much more effective at changing how people evaluated the groups than simply noting surface-level connections like people drink champagne at parties. Interestingly, when they later asked participants to simply list 5 adjectives about the target group, the effects were much smaller. This suggests that the intervention had a stronger impact on immediate reasoning and justification rather than instantly changing deeply ingrained explicit beliefs. So, what does all this mean? It means our stereotypes are far more complex and interconnected than we usually think. They aren't just simple labels, they're like vast networks where social groups are linked to all sorts of everyday objects and concepts. And these objects themselves carry the weight of warmth and competence we associate with groups. The really powerful takeaway is that these stereotypes aren't fixed. By strategically changing the everyday objects or concepts that a group is linked to, we can actually shift how people perceive that group. This is like changing the neighborhood around the social group in this conceptual network. The study highlights that the way we reason about these connections matters. Analogies, which involve deeper structural thinking, are more powerful for changing perceptions than just noticing surface-level similarities. This suggests that to effectively combat bias, we need to encourage this kind of deeper analogical reasoning. What this really implies is that tackling stereotypes requires a broader approach than just telling people don't think that. It means re-engineering the cultural landscape around a group, changing the symbols and objects that are culturally linked to them. This could involve things like pairing groups stereotyped as less capable with objects associated with competence, and encouraging people to understand these links through analogy. Now, like any study, this one has its limitations. One interesting point is that while the interventions changed how people reasoned in the moment for their justifications, it didn't seem to dramatically alter the simple lists of adjectives they generated afterward. This means the change might be more about immediate processing and less about a deep, lasting overhaul of explicit beliefs. The researchers suggest future studies could use more subtle ways to measure these changes. Another point is that the meaning of everyday objects can change over time. Think about how the color pink was once considered masculine. So changing associations might not be a one-time fix. We might need ongoing efforts to keep up with evolving cultural meaning. In the end, this research gives us a fascinating glimpse into the hidden architecture of stereotypes. It shows that our biases are woven into a complex web of associations, and that by understanding and strategically manipulating these connections, we can actually influence how we perceive social groups. It's a call to action to think about the subtle, everyday things we associate with different people, because they might be shaping our judgments more than we realize. So, what do you think about this idea of a hidden architecture of stereotypes? Does it make sense to you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply. We'll see you in the next one.